In April 2021, Cape Town witnessed something straight out of a movie. Elite police units, to the teeth, closed in on Nafiz Modack in his silver, bulletproof Toyota Hilux in Century View. The officers had been tracking his movements for weeks. What followed was a high-speed chase, with police pursuing Modack's vehicle for several kilometers through the city. The chase ended near a construction site on Sable Road. Modack's Hilux was boxed in by two police vehicles. Construction workers nearby ran for cover as heavily armed officers jumped out, drawn, and surrounded the car. Modack was arrested on the spot. To some, he was a generous businessman. To the police, he was the mastermind behind one of South Africa's most powerful crime syndicates. But Modack's arrest wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. His case ripped the curtain off something much bigger, a deeper look into how Cape Town's criminal world had evolved. This wasn't just about street gangs fighting for turf anymore. This was organized crime on a much larger scale. This is the story of the cartels of Cape Town explained. Cape Town is a city of two worlds. To the outside world, it looks like paradise. Tourists come for the view of Table Mountain. They walk along the beaches of Camps Bay, drink wine in Stellenbosch, and shop at the V, a waterfront. They take photos of sunsets and think they've found one of the most beautiful places on earth. That side of Cape Town is real. But it's not the whole story. Just a short drive away, everything changes. The roads lead into the Cape Flats, a wide, flat area where poverty, crime, and pain live side by side. Here, the fancy houses disappear. In their place are crowded flats, tin shacks, and broken streets. People live with fear. Can ring out at any moment. Children play in the road, but everyone knows which streets to avoid, what time to get home, and whom not to look at. This part of Cape Town is caught in a hidden war. It's not about politics or race. It's about power, money, and control. And the gangs are in charge. The gangs have turned entire neighborhoods into strongholds. Their grip is tight and their business is booming. At the heart of it all is a economy built on three things. First, and most pervasive, is trafficking. The gangs control a massive and lucrative trade, with tick, the local name for as its most destructive product. It tears through families, leaves children on their own, and creates a cycle of addiction that's almost impossible to escape. Alongside tick are other like and Cape Town has become a key point for moving into South Africa and beyond. The port is valuable, and the gangs know it. Second is the extortion economy. Gangs don't just control street corners, they reach deep into the city's legal economy. Businesses, restaurants, construction firms, even luxury nightclubs are approached by gang enforcers. The message is always the same: pay us to protect you, or face what comes next. If you refuse, the warnings turn violent. These are not random acts of violence. They are tools of control, used to extract money from Cape Town's wealthiest spaces. Finally, there is running. None of the gang's power works without and the Cape Flats are flooded with them. Many are cross borders. Others come from inside South Africa's own police force, stolen or sold by corrupt officers. With these, young men are pulled into the war. Every street dispute, every business disagreement can turn in an instant. This entire system didn't appear out of thin air. It has been growing for decades, watered by poverty, inequality, and a state that turned its back on entire communities. The roots of this violence go deep. And to understand how Cape Town became a city with two faces, one of beauty, the other of you have to start at the beginning. It all begins with the Group Areas Act of 1950, one of the cornerstones of South Africa's apartheid system. This law gave the government the power to separate people based on their race. Entire neighborhoods were declared whites only, and anyone who wasn't white was forced out. In Cape Town, this was more than just a legal change. It was a social earthquake. Before the Group Areas Act, Cape Town was home to communities where people of different races lived side by side. The most famous of these was District 6, a vibrant neighborhood near the city center. District 6 had life. There was music in the streets, laughter in the markets, and a strong sense of togetherness. The people who lived there came from different backgrounds, but they built something special. The government didn't see it that way. They saw it as a threat to their dream of racial control, so they crushed it. One morning, bulldozers rolled into District 6. Families were given little time to gather their belongings. Their homes were destroyed, their memories were buried under concrete and dust. More than 60,000 people were forcibly removed from District 6 alone. They were taken far outside the city and dumped into a barren, sandy area that would come to be known as the Cape Flats. This was not just relocation, it was isolation. The Cape Flats were never meant to be a real home. The government made sure there were few schools, limited health care, almost no jobs, and barely any police presence. It was a place designed to hold people, not help them. Generations of children grew up knowing poverty and exclusion as normal, and into this space, something dangerous started to grow. The young people born into this forgotten corner of Cape Town grew up without the support systems that give a community strength. They were disconnected from their old neighborhoods, their roots, and their hopes. There were no real opportunities, role models, or paths forward. But there was always a need to belong, to feel strong, and to survive. This is where the first street gangs were born. At first, they were just groups of young people trying to claim some kind of identity. They gave themselves names, created symbols, and drew imaginary borders around the blocks they controlled. They protected their friends and fought their enemies. Over time, those fights became more violent. Their got here, and what started as a search for identity became a battle for control. While this was happening on the streets, something even more dangerous was brewing behind prison walls. South Africa's prison system, especially places like Robben Island and later Pollsmoor, became breeding grounds for a much more structured kind of gang. Inside those cells, the infamous numbers gangs took root. These weren't just random prison cliques. They had deep history, strict rules, and their own twisted kind of order. There are three main numbers gangs. The 26s focus on making money and goods. They are the business branch. The 28s are the enforcers, feared for their violence and control over the gang's power structure. And the 27s are the judges and executioners. They uphold the gang's code with and fear. These gangs operate almost like secret societies. They have rituals, stories, and even their own language. Young inmates are initiated through brutal acts. Discipline is absolute. Betrayal is punished by. Over the years, the numbers gangs turned South Africa's prisons into underground universities for crime. When these prisoners were released, they didn't leave the gang behind. They brought it with them. They returned to the Cape Flats as hardened men, carrying with them the codes and structure of prison life. They began to reshape the small, chaotic street gangs into something more organized and much more dangerous. Then came 1994. Apartheid fell, and South Africa entered a new era of democracy and freedom. For many, it was a moment of hope, but with open borders and a changing economy came new risks. International cartels saw Cape Town's location as a perfect entry point into the country. The port offered a direct line for coming from South America and Asia. Suddenly, local gangs had access to massive quantities of. The flood began. One in particular took hold of the streets. Tick, the local name for spread like wildfire. It was cheap, highly addictive, and easy to make. Tick turned users into shells of their former selves. It hollowed out communities and created a generation of addicts. Alongside Tick came and all feeding a market worth billions. With all that money came power, and new gang leaders emerged. Brothers like Rashid and Rashad Staggy, founders of the Hard Livings gang, went from being thugs to full-blown crime lords. They wore designer clothes, drove expensive cars, and owned legitimate businesses to cover up their illegal empires. They didn't hide in the shadows. They walked the streets with confidence. They were celebrities and criminals at the same time, but their rise didn't go unchallenged. As gangs grew bolder, communities began to push back. One of the most famous groups to emerge was PAGAD, People Against Gangsterism, and These were ordinary citizens, many of them Muslims from the Cape Flats, who had simply had enough. They marched in the streets, they burned down dens, and in some cases, they took justice into their own hands. The conflict between Paget and the gangs turned the streets into battlegrounds once again. By the early 2000s, Cape Town had changed forever. The seeds planted during apartheid had taken root. The Cape Flats, built as a dumping ground, had become the perfect breeding ground for organized crime. And these resulted in a high level of street-level violence. However, the street-level violence is only one part of a much larger system. In recent years, a new type of gang leader has taken control. This leader doesn't just think like a gangster. He thinks like a businessman. He's not just worried about who controls a block or a neighborhood. He's thinking about controlling industries, managing supply chains, and moving money through legal businesses. He doesn't want chaos in the streets. He wants quiet, stable profits. This new model is less about flashy violence and more about strategy. It avoids open war when possible, using bribes, threats, and calculated attacks to get what it wants. These modern crime bosses aim to bring rival gangs under one umbrella. Instead of fighting over the same turf, they create a kind of franchise system. One person controls the supply of while the street gangs act as local sellers. Everyone gets a cut, and the boss keeps things running smoothly, like a well-managed company. Take Nafiz Modack, for example. His alleged rise to power is a textbook case of this new way of operating. He didn't try to destroy other gangs. Instead, he tried to control them. His focus wasn't just on the trade. He went after Cape Town's security industry, using violence and threats to force high-end nightclubs and restaurants to hire his companies. If they refused, there would be consequences. Businesses either paid up or faced serious trouble. Some were even forced to close their doors. The same tactic has been used in construction. Cartel-controlled groups bring multi-million rand projects to a standstill by threatening workers or damaging property. Builders are left with two choices: pay the gang or stop working. Often, the gang demands to be given the security contract or a cut of the profits. These are not just street-level criminals anymore. They're businessmen with armies behind them. They're pulling in millions while keeping their hands clean. To hide their profits, these cartels move the money through legitimate-looking businesses like debt collection agencies, car dealerships, or property firms. On the surface, everything seems legal. But behind the scenes, the money comes from deals, extortion, and illegal imports. It's a high-level operation that combines street muscle with corporate thinking. What makes this setup even more dangerous is its connection to international crime. Cape Town is a port city, which means it's a natural gateway for global syndicates. Nigerian groups are known to work closely with local gangs, helping to bring in and some Eastern European and Israeli crime groups have also formed alliances, especially when it comes to weapon smuggling or precious stones. Even Chinese triads are involved, especially in the illegal trade of abalone, a highly valued sea snail, and in shipping chemicals used to make tick. These international groups rely on the local cartels to move products, handle security, and keep law enforcement at bay. In return, the Cape Town syndicates access a massive supply chain and international protection. It's a partnership that benefits both sides, making the system harder to break and more dangerous than ever. So what we have now is a clear structure. The old street gangs still fight and hustle on the ground, keeping communities in fear. But above them, there's a quiet, well-dressed criminal elite. These are the men who control the real money. They don't need to hold a gun because they already own the people who do, and their influence is growing. What makes it worse is how the gangs protect their operations. With corruption. Corruption is the glue that holds everything together. Without it, the entire system would collapse. Corrupt police officers are paid to look the other way or actively help the gangs. They'll tip off cartel leaders before raids happen. They'll lose evidence. Some are even used to intimidate witnesses or arrange hits on people who might testify. These dirty cops don't wear gang colors, but they're just as much a part of the machine. It doesn't stop with the police. The justice system is also infected. A gang leader might get arrested for trafficking or But suddenly, the prosecutor decides there's not enough evidence. Or the magistrate grants bail, even though the suspect is clearly dangerous. Bribes flow quietly through the system. Everyone has a price. And this revolving door means even the worst criminals can be back on the streets within days, often feeling even more untouchable than before. This level of corruption destroys more than cases. It trust. Communities that should be working with the police to fight crime instead keep their distance. People are too scared to speak out because they don't know who they can trust. And even the honest cops, the ones who really want to make a difference, end up frustrated and powerless. For years, Cape Town has lived under the shadow of gang violence. Bloodshed, extortion, and fear had become everyday realities in many neighborhoods. It felt like the gangs ruled the streets, like no one could stop them. But that hasn't stopped the South African government, and more importantly, it hasn't stopped the people. A war has begun. Not a war in the traditional sense, but a battle being fought on two very different fronts. One is led by the government, using force, intelligence, and strategy. The other is driven by the communities, using courage, unity, and a refusal to give up on the places they call home. The government's plan is focused on pressure and precision. Their message to the gang bosses is simple: your time is up. To make that message loud and clear, they created specialized units like the Anti-Gang Unit, or AGU. These are not ordinary police officers. They are elite, highly trained, and heavily armed. Their mission is to strike at the heart of gang operations. They raid drug labs, bust open safe houses, and track the leaders hiding behind layers of protection. They don't aim low, they aim for the top. Working closely with them is one of South Africa's most powerful investigative bodies, the Hawks. But while the AGU takes on the streets, the Hawks focus on the shadows. They follow the money. They track shell companies, money laundering rings, and the politicians or business people who sit quietly behind the scenes. They don't just go after the they go after the masterminds. And one of those masterminds was Nafiz Modack. For years, Nafiz Modack operated not in the shadows, but in the spotlight. He presented himself as a legitimate, if controversial, businessman. He was often seen driving luxury cars and was connected to a portfolio of businesses, most notably a large private security group. But on the streets and in the nightclubs of Cape Town, his name carried a different weight. His business model, authorities alleged, was a masterclass in modern extortion. Instead of fighting for street corners, Modack's syndicate allegedly fought for boardroom control of the city's lucrative nightlife and hospitality industry. His representatives would approach a popular club or restaurant and advise them to terminate their current security contract. They were then forced to hire Modack's security company at an inflated price. Those who complied were left alone. Those who refused faced a campaign of terror. This could include orchestrated fights breaking out on their premises, bombings of their cars, or outright violent attacks. He was allegedly selling security from a threat that he himself created. This empire of fear was protected by a shield of alleged corruption, with a network of police officers on his payroll who could make dockets vanish and provide warnings about pending investigations, making him seem untouchable. For a long time, Modack's alleged operations continued despite numerous clashes with the law. But on September 18, 2020, a critical line was crossed. On that day, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Kinnear, one of the Western Cape's most dedicated and fearless anti-gang detectives, was assassinated. As he sat in his car outside his own home, a gunman approached and multiple shots, killing him instantly. Kinnear was not just any police officer. He was the lead investigator in a massive case against Modack and his network. His was not a random act of violence. It was a direct and audacious assault on the state itself. It sent a chilling message. No one investigating the syndicate was safe. This act, however, proved to be a fatal miscalculation. The assassination of a top detective galvanized the South African police service and the justice system into action with a singular, unified purpose. The goal was no longer just to disrupt a criminal enterprise, but to bring down a titan for the of one of their own. What followed was one of the most intensive manhunts and investigations in recent memory. After months of painstaking work, the Elite Hawks investigative unit finally closed in. In April 2021, Nafiz Modack was captured in a dramatic, high-profile arrest. Modack's charges piled up. For the of Letkal, Kinnear, attempted lawyer William Booth, extortion, kidnapping, money laundering, racketeering, and more. He also faced separate VAT fraud charges worth over $219 million, part of which he allegedly pocketed. Despite the weight of accusations, the legal proceedings stalled. Modack was denied bail in January 2022. He remained in custody while investigations continued. However, in November 2024, the prosecution unexpectedly closed its case. Defense attorneys announced plans to seek acquittal, arguing for dismissal of many charges. As of mid-2025, Modack and several relatives await trial in the South Gotten High Court on gun license fraud charges. The and extortion charges remain pending in Western Cape courts, with pre-trial hearings scheduled for early 2026. But even Modack's arrest didn't end the violence. The gangs didn't crumble overnight. What it did show was that the government could reach the top, that no one was too powerful to fall. Still, when violence explodes and even elite forces aren't enough, the state turns to its final line of defense, the South African National Defense Force. Soldiers move into the townships. Armored vehicles patrol areas that used to echo with the sounds of children playing. The military presence is overwhelming. And at first, it works. The slow down. Hot spots go quiet. Because once the army leaves, the gangs return. They don't disappear. They just relocate, they adapt, and it all starts again. But while the government fights with bullets and arrests, something else is happening. Something quieter, something even more powerful. It's a second war, led not by the state, but by ordinary people. People who've had enough. People who are standing up, even when it's dangerous, because this is their home, and they refuse to let it be destroyed. Across the Cape Flats, mothers, teachers, pastors, and even ex-gangsters are stepping in where the system has failed. They are forming neighborhood watches. They are organizing school walks to keep kids safe. They are offering alternatives, real ones, to young people who feel like they have no choice but to join a gang. Community policing forums are the backbone of this movement. They're made up of volunteers who collect information, build trust, and try to bridge the massive gap between police and the people. These are not people with or badges. They are people with a deep love for their community and a willingness to stand up, even when that makes them targets. NGOs and churches are also part of this fight. They run after-school programs, mentorship sessions, and creative spaces where kids can find purpose, discipline, and belonging. These programs may seem small, but they save lives. They stop young boys from picking up a gun. They give them something to hope for. And perhaps most powerful of all are the violence interrupters. These are men who once lived the gang life themselves. They know the codes, the signs, and the temptations. Now, they use that knowledge to stop the violence before it starts. They mediate conflict. They step into dangerous situations and de-escalate them. They are the bridge between chaos and calm. And because they have walked the walk, people listen when they speak. And yet, for all this bravery, the truth is hard. The community cannot win this alone. Neither can the state. Police raids without community trust don't work. Community programs without protection are crushed. There has to be a partnership between the people and the system meant to protect them. And more than anything, there has to be change. Real, deep, structural change. That means decent schools with real resources, jobs that pay so young people don't have to sell to survive, mental health care that helps people heal, and a justice system that does not buckle under the weight of corruption. Cape Town stands at a crossroads. The fight is long. The damage is deep. But there is still hope, because every time someone chooses to care or refuses to give up, they push back against the darkness. No one knows for sure how this war ends. But in a city scarred by violence, the most powerful weapon may not be a or a badge. It may be a choice. The choice to fight for something better